The coffee in Admiral Vance's mug had gone cold hours ago. She barely noticed. Her eyes stayed locked on the main screen in the lunar bunker. Tranquility Prime. A huge, dimly lit room, buried deep beneath the moon's dusty surface. Outside the thick viewports, Earth hung in the black, a fragile blue marble. Inside, the air hummed with quiet tension and the low beep of machines. People moved slowly, speaking in hushed tones. Something was wrong. Something big. It started small. Just a flicker on the deep space scanners. A weird distortion near Neptune. Like heat haze on a desert road, but out in the freezing emptiness of space. The scientists at the Vera Rubin Observatory on Earth spotted it first. They called it in, voices tight with disbelief. Gravitational lensing, where there's nothing to bend the light. At first, everyone thought it was a glitch, a cosmic hiccup, but the flicker didn't go away. It grew. It moved. Then the images came through. Grainy, distant, but undeniably real. Shapes. Dozens of them. Huge, silent shapes, darker than the space around them, gliding past the gas giants like sharks in a dark ocean. They weren't reflecting any sunlight. They just absorbed it. Obsidian giants, each one longer than a whole city stretched out. They moved with a smooth, unnatural silence that felt heavier than any roar. No engine flares, no radio chatter. Just this slow, deliberate crawl towards the inner solar system, towards Mars, towards Earth. Down on Earth, panic tried to bubble up. News channels scrambled. Social media exploded with wild guesses. Space tourists? Secret military project? But the order came fast and sharp from the highest levels. Silence. Absolute silence. No broadcasts, no alarms, no public warnings. The world held its breath, unaware of the shadow falling over it. In the bunker, Vance felt the weight of that silence. It was worse than shouting. It meant it was real, and it was bad. Back in the command chair, Vance pulled up the classified files. The Cathar, not a name anyone had ever heard publicly, but buried deep in old, dusty reports from deep space probes. A civilization, or maybe a hive mind, that had been quietly wiping out worlds for centuries. They didn't conquer. They consumed. Like locusts, stripping a field bare. They'd hit planet after planet, system after system, leaving behind only dead rocks and cold stars. Their technology wasn't just advanced. It felt alien, in the truest sense. Things humans couldn't even imagine. Bending gravity, tearing holes in reality itself for travel, shields that seemed to predict attacks before they happened. No one had ever stopped them. Not really. Some reports whispered of desperate last stands, of planets vanishing from sensors mid-battle, but the Cathar always won. Always moved on. They were the unstoppable force of the galaxy. Vance scrolled through the chilling summaries. Species. Gamma. 7. Assimilated. Biosphere repurposed for raw materials. System Theta. 9. Core drained. No survivors. It wasn't war. It was harvesting. Like humans might pluck fruit from a tree, the Cathar harvested entire worlds. And now, their massive fleet, 28 of those impossible black ships, had stopped, right at the orbit of Mars. Not attacking, just hovering, waiting. Her chief science officer, a woman with tired eyes and fingers stained with coffee, leaned over Vance's shoulder. Her voice was a dry whisper. They're setting up something. Admiral. A field. Energy readings are off the charts. It's like they're sticking a giant straw into the planet. She pulled up complex energy graphs that made Vance's head spin. But the conclusion was horrifyingly simple. They're trying to suck the heat right out of Earth's core. For fuel. For their machines. Vance stared at the blue planet on the screen. Home. 7 billion people going about their lives, completely unaware that somewhere between Mars and Jupiter, a cosmic vacuum cleaner was being turned on, aimed straight at the heart of their world. The sheer, casual arrogance of it made her stomach churn. To the Cathar, Earth wasn't a home. It wasn't sacred. It was just resources. A convenient gas station on their endless road trip through the stars. They'd seen the faint radio signals, the tiny flickers of light from cities. Primitive, harmless, no threat at all. Why bother with a full invasion? Just drain the core and move on. Leave a dead, frozen rock behind. She remembered the old, fragmented alien data packet they'd managed to partially decode years ago. A captured fragment from a long-dead probe. The title, translated roughly, was chillingly confident. They conquered the stars. It wasn't a boast. It was a simple statement of fact, as obvious to them as the sun rising. They'd done it, over and over. They owned the night sky. And Earth? Earth was just the next stop. The report attached to that title had one line that stuck in Vance's mind. Probability of indigenous threat. Negligible. To them, humanity wasn't even a rounding error. Less than nothing. In the bunker, the mood was grim, but focused. Weapons teams ran frantic simulations. Nuclear missiles? The Cathar shields had shrugged off planet busters before. Kinetic impactors? Their predictive systems would dodge them like raindrops. Lasers? Absorbed or deflected. Every human weapon felt suddenly, embarrassingly small, like trying to stop a tsunami with a bucket. The despair was a physical thing in the air, thick enough to choke on. Vance saw it in the slumped shoulders of her officers, in the way people avoided each other's eyes. What could puny humans possibly do against gods who played with black holes? But Vance forced herself to stand straighter. She thought about the people down there. Kids playing in parks they didn't know were numbered. Farmers tending fields under a sky they thought was safe. Lovers watching the sunset. Unaware it might be the last one Earth ever saw. Her people. Her home. The Cathar saw resources. She saw life. Real, messy, beautiful, human life. And that made all the difference, even if the odds were impossible. She walked over to the main window, the thick glass showing Earth in serene silence. No sirens, no fire, just the quiet hum of the bunker and the vast, uncaring void outside. The Cathar fleet was still out there, silent and patient near Mars. They thought they had all the time in the world. They thought Earth was already theirs. They thought they'd conquered the stars. Vance took a slow breath, the cold air sharp in her lungs. She didn't feel fear anymore. Not exactly. It was something hotter, sharper, a fierce, protective anger. They were wrong, dead wrong. Maybe humanity couldn't fight them with big guns. Maybe they couldn't match their fancy shields. But Earth wasn't just a rock. It was alive. And it had secrets the Cathar, with all their cold calculations, hadn't even bothered to look for. They saw only what they expected to see. Primitive signals, weak defenses. They didn't see the deep, ancient pulse of the planet itself. They didn't see the slow, patient dance of the solar system, the hidden currents of gravity and time that had been flowing long before humans walked the Earth and would flow long after. As she watched the blue planet, a tiny, stubborn hope flickered in her chest, fragile but real. The Cathar thought they were the hunters, but maybe, just maybe, they'd wandered into a trap they never saw coming. Not a trap made by humans, but by the universe itself. The stars weren't just conquered. They were alive with forces older and stranger than anyone knew. And Earth had its own guardian. Not a weapon, but something far older, far more patient. Something the Cathar, in their smug certainty, had completely overlooked. The coffee stayed cold. The tension stayed thick. The black ships stayed silent, near Mars. But in the quiet heart of the lunar bunker, Admiral Vance felt the first faint stirrings of something the Cathar had never encountered in all their star-conquering. The quiet, unyielding resilience of a home fighting for its survival. The game wasn't over. Not yet. The Behemoth was still asleep. And it was time to wake it up. The coffee stain on the report blurred as Admiral Vance's hand trembled. Outside Tranquility Prime's viewport, Earth still glowed peacefully, unaware its core was being tapped like a keg at a party. The Cathar ships hadn't fired a shot. They hadn't needed to. For 2 days now, they'd just hovered near Mars, silent and patient, as vultures waiting for prey to weaken. Down on the blue planet, life carried on. Kids kicked soccer balls in backyards. Street vendors sold hot noodles under neon signs. Lovers argued over which movie to watch. All of it happening under a sky where something ancient and hungry was sucking the heat right out of the world's heart. Vance pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Vance pressed her. They don't even know they're bleeding out. The thought made her throat tight. Back in the bunker, the air smelled like stale sweat and burnt circuitry. No one slept. No one laughed. People moved like ghosts between consoles, eyes red-rimmed, voices hushed, as if the Cathar might hear them through the vacuum of space. A young technician, just a kid, really, with paint-stained fingers from fixing broken gear, kept replaying the same sensor feed. It showed the energy field, invisible to human eyes, but the machine saw it, a shimmering net, stretching from the lead dreadnought all the way down to Earth's surface. Like a spiderweb catching a planet. They're not invading, Vance had told her team hours ago. The words still tasted like ash. They're harvesting. She watched a scientist trace the energy readings on a screen. His hand shook as he pointed. See here? It's pulling heat from the mantle, like sticking a straw into a volcano. At this rate, within days, the magnetic field starts collapsing. Then the atmosphere bleeds away. Oceans freeze solid. All life, gone. He didn't say we. He said all life, as if humanity was already just another fossil waiting to be uncovered. Vance remembered her grandmother's farm back home. The smell of wet soil after rain. The way cows lowed at dawn. All of it. The dirt, the rain, the life, was being measured by cold machines as raw material. The Cathar didn't hate Earth. They didn't even see it. To them, this was like a lumberjack looking at a forest. Useful, temporary, replaceable. Then came the reports from Earth. Not panic, not chaos, just quiet. The order had held. Silence. Absolute silence. Governments locked down news feeds. Social media buzzed with weird glitches. Server maintenance, they called it. But people felt it. A deep, nameless dread in the bones. Streets in major cities were emptier than rush hour. In Tokyo, someone filmed birds falling silent mid-flight. In Nairobi, church bells rang all night long without anyone touching them. The world was holding its breath, not knowing why. Vance closed her eyes. She saw a little girl in Rio chasing a yellow balloon down a hillside. She saw an old man in Delhi feeding sparrows on his balcony. She saw her city, the one with the crooked clock tower and the bakery that sold cinnamon rolls at 2 a.m. All of it, humming along, seconds from being snuffed out like a candle. Then the weapons teams reported in. Hopeless. Missiles launched from silos in Montana. A commander muttered, rubbing his eyes. Hit their shields at Mach 20, bounced off like pebbles. He played the footage, the bright flare of nukes exploding against an invisible wall, the fireball spreading sideways like water hitting glass. No damage, not even a scratch. Kinetic rods from orbit? Vance asked, already knowing the answer. Predicted, dodged. He showed the tracking data. Our rods curving harmlessly past the dreadnoughts, like they'd known exactly where to be. They're computers. They see moves before we make them. Lasers? Absorbed. Like the shields. Ate the light. Someone else chimed in, voice flat. We threw everything. Nukes. Railguns. EMPs. Nothing touches them. It's like throwing matches at a mountain. The room went dead quiet. The truth settled in like cold water. Humanity's greatest weapons were firecrackers against a hurricane. We'd spent centuries building bombs to destroy each other, and now we had nothing to fight this. The Cathar hadn't come to conquer. They'd come to clean up, and we were just trash in their path. Vance walked to the main viewport again. Earth's oceans glittered under the sun. She thought of the stories she'd read as a kid. Knights, fighting dragons. David versus Goliath. Real heroes always had a trick, a weakness, a hidden strength. But what did Earth have? Dirt? Water? Air? Useless against Star Eaters. Then she noticed something. A flicker on the long-range sensors. Not from the Cathar, from beyond them. Zoom in on Sector 7G, she ordered, pointing at a cluster of faint blips near Jupiter's orbit. The tech squinted. Comets. Just comets. A few dozen. Nothing unusual. Track their paths. He ran the simulation. Lines crisscrossed the screen, most curving away from the solar system, harmless. But three were different. Tiny, icy rocks, no bigger than mountains, pulled by Jupiter's gravity into a slow, looping dive toward the inner planets, toward Mars, toward the Cathar fleet. Probability of collision? Vance asked, her voice suddenly tight. 0.2%, the tech said dismissively. They'll miss by millions of miles. Just space junk. But Vance couldn't look away. She remembered old astronomy lectures. How a single pebble, nudged just right by gravity, could send ripples through the solar system for centuries. How Earth itself was shaped by collisions nobody saw coming. They're not looking, she realized. They only see what they expect. The Cathar sensors were built for weapons. Lasers. Missiles. Energy blasts. Not for slow, silent ice. Not for the patient pull of gravity. They'd scanned Earth for guns and found only radios. They'd scanned the void for traps and found only vacuum. But space wasn't empty. It was full of things moving in the dark, things older than stars. She turned to her science officer, the one with coffee-stained fingers. What if they're not here for war? The woman blinked. What do you mean? What if they think this is easy? Like picking berries? What if they never even looked for landmines? Landmines? Natural ones. Vance tapped the screen where the comet paths glowed. Space isn't just empty out there. It's crowded. With rocks. With ice. With things falling for millions of years. What if... She hesitated, the idea too fragile to say out loud. What if... The solar system defends itself. The officer stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You think comets are gonna save us? I think the Cathar made a mistake, Vance said, her voice low and fierce. They saw a quiet planet. They saw weak signals. They saw nothing. But Earth isn't alone out here. We're part of something bigger, something older. And maybe, just maybe, it's got teeth. She didn't believe it yet. Not really. But in that moment, staring at those tiny blips on the screen, she felt it. A spark. Not hope. Not yet. But possibility. The Cathar thought they'd mapped the universe, but they'd missed the forest for the trees. They'd forgotten that even a quiet backyard has snakes in the grass. Back on Earth, the little girl in Rio finally caught her yellow balloon. She laughed, pressing it to her cheek. The old man in Delhi scattered one last handful of seeds for the sparrows. The bakery in Vance's city turned on its ovens for the night shift. And high above Mars, the Cathar dreadnoughts kept humming, their energy strawed deep in Earth's heart. Oblivious. Because why would gods look down at the dirt? They didn't see the comets coming. They didn't see the behemoth waking up. It was still asleep. But its breath was starting to stir the ice. The bunker air tasted like metal and fear. For 3 days, the Cathar fleet had hung near Mars, silent and unmoving, their invisible energy straw buried deep into Earth's core. Down on the blue planet, things were starting to feel wrong. Not dramatic explosions or alien landings, just small, creeping things that made people rub their eyes and wonder if they were tired. Streetlights flickered without reason. Birds flew in confused circles. In coastal towns, the ocean seemed heavier, slower, like thick syrup. Nobody knew why. Governments still held the silence, but the dread in people's bones was growing. Kids sensed it. Animals sensed it. The world was bleeding out, drop by drop, and nobody could scream. Inside Tranquility Prime, Admiral Vance hadn't slept. Her eyes were raw from staring at the main screen, watching the comet paths she'd spotted. 3 tiny, icy rocks, drifting in from the outer darkness. The young tech who'd first dismissed them kept glancing nervously at Vance's console. He'd started calling them the sleepwalkers under his breath. They moved so slowly, so quietly, barely a blip on the sensors. To the Cathar, they were less than dust, just more space junk in a universe full of junk. Their machines scanned for weapons fire, for energy spikes, for threats, not for ancient ice falling through the void like snowflakes. They saw only what they expected to see. A primitive planet. Easy pickings. They didn't see the slow, patient clockwork of the solar system ticking down behind their backs. Vance remembered a story her grandfather told her as a kid. About a bear sleeping in the woods. You could shout. You could throw stones. The bear wouldn't stir. But if you accidentally kicked a pebble that started a rock slide, then the bear woke up. And it was hungry. She kept staring at those comet paths. Are you the pebble? Or are you the rock slide? Then the siphon field intensified. On the screen, the shimmering energy net connecting the Cathar ships to Earth flared bright red. A low groan vibrated through the bunker's floor. Not sound, but a deep, physical thrum, like the planet itself was in pain. Alarms blared softly on consoles. Magnetic field weakening, someone shouted, voice cracking. Seismic activity spiking near the Pacific Ring. Another screen showed live feeds from Earth. A bridge in Chile shuddering. Not from an earthquake, but from the ground softening. Like warm wax. Power grids flickered across continents. In Tokyo, the neon signs died one by one, plunging the city into an unnatural twilight. The Cathar weren't just draining heat anymore. They were killing the planet's heartbeat. Earth's magnetic shield, the invisible force that protected life from deadly space radiation, was fraying at the edges. Without it, the sun's fury would strip the atmosphere away. Slowly, painfully, like peeling skin. Vance clenched her fists. They're in a hurry now, getting greedy. The thought was ice in her veins. She pictured her city's bakery. The warm smell of bread. The sleepy baker wiping flour from his brow. Was the oven still working? Was the baker even alive under that darkening sky? The Cathar didn't care. To them, Earth was just a battery running low, and they needed one last charge. But Vance's eyes kept snapping back to the comets. The sleepwalkers. Their paths had shifted, ever so slightly. Jupiter's massive gravity was tugging at them, bending their slow fall inward, like a hand guiding a marble down a curved ramp. The young tech recalculated frantically. Admiral, the closest one, It's not missing by millions of miles anymore. It's going to skim past the lead dreadnought. Close. Real close. How close? Vance asked, her voice barely a whisper. Close enough to bump it. If it were a car, you'd call it a fender bender. He looked up, eyes wide. But it's space ice, hitting a ship the size of a city. It's nothing. Nothing. Nothing to them, Vance corrected, a strange tightness in her chest. But what if their shields aren't built for bumps? What if they only look for bullets? Nobody answered. The room felt smaller, hotter. People stopped typing, stopped breathing. All eyes flicked between the siphon field's angry pulse and the tiny, creeping comet icon on the long-range map. It was so small, so slow, like watching a raindrop fall towards a tank. Hours crawled by. The thrumming in the floor grew stronger. On Earth, reports came in. Silent, fragmented, terrifying. A forest in Canada, where trees were suddenly brittle, snapping like dry twigs. A beach in Australia, where the sand was freezing solid under a noonday sun. The planet was stiffening, dying from the inside out. The Cathar were winning. Fast. Then, impact. Not a boom. Not a flash. Just a tiny, almost invisible shimmer on the edge of the lead dreadnought's shield. Like a pebble skipping across a pond. The comet, a mountain of ice and rock no bigger than a city block, had grazed the ship's energy field at 40,000 miles per hour. To human eyes, nothing happened. The dreadnought hung there, obsidian and perfect. But on the sensors, chaos. The smooth, humming energy net connecting the fleet to Earth rippled, like throwing a stone into that pond. The siphon field flickered violently. For 3 seconds, just 3 seconds, the thrumming in the bunker floor stopped. On the screen, Earth's magnetic field readings spiked back towards normal. A collective gasp went through the room. It worked? A bump. Stop the drain? Then the Cathar computers reacted. Fast. Too fast. They saw the ripple in their shield, the momentary siphon failure. To them, it was a glitch, a cosmic hiccup. Their systems instantly recalibrated, shunting power, smoothing the field back into place. The thrumming returned, stronger than before. The siphon field flared crimson. Earth's magnetic readings plummeted again. The bridge in Chile collapsed. The Cathar hadn't been hurt. They'd barely noticed. Just another speck of dust in the void. Despair crashed over the bunker like a wave. The young tech buried his face in his hands. An old engineer slumped into his chair, muttering about wasted hope. Vance felt the weight of it. The crushing certainty that they'd been fools. That the comets were just comets. That Earth was dying, and nobody was coming to save it. But Vance kept watching the sensors. Not the siphon field. The comet. That tiny ripple. It hadn't just rippled the shield. For a fraction of a second, it had distorted it, like pressing a finger into jelly. And the Cathar computers, so brilliant at predicting laser strikes and missile trajectories, hadn't seen ice coming. They'd reacted to the effect. The ripple. Not the cause. Their predictive evasion was built for artificial threats, for weapons fired with intent, not for the slow, dumb, inevitable pull of gravity on a billion-year-old chunk of space ice. She saw it then. Not a rock slide. A chain reaction. The first comet's bump had been a pebble. But space wasn't empty. Behind the first comet, pulled by the same gravitational currents, came others. Smaller ones. Faster ones. Debris kicked up by the first impact. And the Cathar ships? They were sitting ducks. Massive. Unmoving. Blocking the path of the solar system's slow, icy traffic jam. Track all debris near the fleet, Vance ordered, her voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the despair. Not just the big comets. The dust. The shrapnel. The techs scrambled. New data flooded the screens. Tiny impacts, microscopic collisions, each one sending out a new ripple in the Cathar shield. Each ripple making the shield momentarily imperfect, like a drop of oil hitting a smooth pond, spreading outwards. And then, the second comet hit. Not a graze this time, a direct hit. A smaller ice ball, no bigger than a house, slammed into the same spot on the lead dreadnought's shield where the first ripple had been. The shield flared, not red, but a sickly, unstable yellow. The siphon field stuttered again, harder this time. Earth's magnetic field jumped erratically. For 10 seconds, the thrumming stopped completely. On the screen, a city in India lit up. Power restored. Streetlights blazing against the unnatural dark. The Cathar computers went wild. Alarms blared on their ships. Faint, distorted signals picked up by Tranquility Prime's sensitive ears. Confusion. Their perfect predictive systems were being overwhelmed by something they couldn't comprehend. Not an attack, but noise. The slow, relentless drumbeat of natural space debris, amplified by their own shield's instability. Each tiny impact created a new weakness. A new point where the next piece of ice could strike deeper. Vance leaned forward, her knuckles white on the console edge. She wasn't seeing weapons anymore. She was seeing dominoes. One tiny nudge, then another, then another. The behemoth wasn't a monster. It was the system, the ancient, grinding gears of gravity and time. The Cathar had stepped into a clockwork universe and assumed they were the only ones who knew how to tell time. They hadn't seen the gears turning around them. The third comet was coming. Bigger. Faster. Riding the wake of the first two impacts. Its path, bent by Jupiter's pull, and the chaos of the debris field, was no longer a near miss. It was a direct line. Straight for the lead dreadnought's weakened shield. In the bunker, nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. The young tech stared at the collision timer. 0 hours, 2 minutes and 17 seconds. 0 hours, 2 minutes and 16 seconds. His fingers hovered over the console. Not to fire a weapon. There was nothing to fire. But as if he could somehow push the comet faster. Vance closed her eyes. She didn't see dreadnoughts or comets. She saw the baker in her city, pulling the last warm loaves from the oven. She saw the old man in Delhi scattering seeds for sparrows that wouldn't fly tomorrow. She saw the little girl in Rio, her yellow balloon finally floating away. Come on, she thought, not to any god, but to the cold, ancient darkness between the stars. Just this once, just tip the scale. On the screen, the timer hit 0 hours and 3 seconds. The behemoth wasn't waking up. It was already awake, and it was time to clean house. The air in Tranquility Prime felt thick enough to chew. Everyone in the bunker held their breath as the timer on the main screen blinked down. 0 hours and 3 seconds. 0 hours and 2 seconds. The young tech's fingers hovered over his console. Not to fire a weapon, there were none left to fire, but like he could somehow push the comet faster with his will. Outside the viewport, Earth hung silent, its blue glow dimmed by the Cathar's energy drain. The thrumming in the floor had become a constant ache, like the planet's heart was failing. 0 hours and 1 seconds. The third comet hit. Not with a flash, not with fire, just a silent, brutal crunch that showed up on sensors as a violent spike of raw kinetic energy. The dreadnought's shield, the same spot already weakened by the first two impacts, shattered like glass under a hammer. For a split second, the obsidian hull of the lead ship rippled, as if made of liquid shadow. Then, deep inside, something critical failed. A cascade of explosions tore through the ship from within, not from weapons fire, but from its own unstable singularity core going haywire. One moment, it was a mountain of darkness against the stars. The next, it was gone, reduced to a cloud of glowing debris spinning silently into the void. The siphon field connecting the fleet to Earth snapped like a broken rubber band. The thrumming in the bunker floor stopped dead. On the main screen, Earth's magnetic field readings jumped wildly up, not down. Power grids across the planet flickered back to life. In Tokyo, neon signs blazed to life in the darkened streets. In Delhi, the old man scattering seeds for sparrows saw birds suddenly take flight again, their wings cutting clean through the air like they hadn't in days. Down in Rio, the little girl chasing her yellow balloon felt the wind pick up, warm and familiar against her face. But the bunker stayed silent. No cheers. No shouts of relief. Just stunned faces staring at the screens. The destruction of the lead dreadnought wasn't the end, it was the start. Because space wasn't empty. It was crowded. The debris from the shattered ship became the next wave of attackers. Shards of obsidian hull, no bigger than cars, tumbled outward at terrifying speed. One clipped the shield of the second dreadnought, then another. And another. Each impact sent new ripples through the Cathar's harmonic shielding ripples their computers couldn't predict, couldn't compensate for. Their predictive evasion systems, flawless against missiles and lasers, were useless against this chaos. The shields weren't designed for slow, dumb ice, or for the unpredictable ricochet of their own shattered hulls. The second dreadnought tried to move. Too late. A chunk of debris the size of a bus punched through its weakened shield and slammed into its main engine array. The ship didn't explode, it folded, like paper crushed in a fist. One side crumpled inward, spilling glowing innards into space before the whole thing snapped in half and spiraled toward the sun, trailing sparks like dying fireflies. Panic erupted on the Cathar ships. Their silent, arrogant hum was replaced by frantic, overlapping signals. Distorted bursts of alien static picked up by Tranquility Prime's audio feeds. It sounded like confusion, like machines realizing the rules had changed. Their sensors, tuned for energy weapons and smart missiles, were blind to the real threat: gravity, momentum, and the relentless, ancient clockwork of the solar system. They'd treated space like a sterile lab. But space wasn't sterile. It was alive, with things falling, colliding, and breaking apart since before life began on Earth. Then came the dominoes. The third dreadnought, trying to flee toward Jupiter, got caught in the debris field. A comet fragment no bigger than a house slammed into its navigation array. The ship veered wildly, its path now aimed straight for the fourth dreadnought. They collided with a slow, grinding inevitability, like two trains on the same track. Metal screamed against metal in the vacuum, a sound only sensors could translate. And both ships broke apart, adding more debris to the storm. Inside the bunker, the young tech finally spoke, his voice hoarse. They're hitting each other. He pointed at the screen, where collision after collision played out, in silent, deadly ballet. The debris. It's like shrapnel in a snow globe. They can't dodge it all. Admiral Vance didn't move. She watched as the Cathar Armada, which had conquered stars without breaking a sweat, unraveled piece by piece, not by human hands, but by the slow, patient violence of the cosmos itself. One dreadnought got caught in Mars's gravity well and smashed into the red planet's surface, vanishing in a silent plume of dust. Another drifted too close to Jupiter's immense pull and was stretched thin like taffy before snapping apart. A third, critically damaged, tried to jump to light speed, but its core overloaded mid-translation, tearing the ship into ribbons of light that faded into nothing. It wasn't a battle. It was a reckoning. Down on Earth, people felt it. Not the explosions, there were none to hear, but the shift, the unnatural chill lifting from the air, the streetlights staying bright, the birds singing again at dawn. In a hospital in Nairobi, a doctor noticed the heart monitors of patients stabilized all at once. In a fishing village in Norway, the sea stopped feeling thick and sluggish, returning to its familiar, restless rhythm. Nobody knew why, But the weight pressing down on the world, the silent dread began to lift. Back in the bunker, the mood wasn't triumph. It was disbelief, edged with something deeper. Awe. The weapons teams stared at their empty consoles. The nuclear missiles they'd launched, the lasers they'd fired, all useless. But this was the solar system itself, fighting back. The comets, the debris, the gravity of planets they'd been here all along, waiting, patient, unseen. The Cathar hadn't just underestimated Earth. They'd underestimated everything. The Admiral walked to the viewport. Outside, near Saturn's rings, 3 crippled dreadnoughts drifted. Dark and silent. Their lights were out. No energy readings. Just dead hulks adrift in the cold. The rest were gone, reduced to dust, swallowed by planets, or lost in the sun's fire. On the main screen, Earth glowed steadily, its magnetic field readings climbing back toward normal. The siphon field was dead. The bleeding had stopped. A quiet voice spoke from the science station. "They're gone. All but 3. Vance nodded slowly. She thought of the baker in her city, pulling warm bread from the oven. The old man in Delhi, watching sparrows dance in the sunlight. The little girl in Rio, holding her yellow balloon high as the wind carried it up, up, up into the clean, blue sky. They'd survived. Not because humans were strong, not because they were clever, but because they were here. Because Earth wasn't just a rock. It was part of something vast and ancient and fiercely protective. The Behemoth wasn't a weapon. It was the universe itself, humming along in its slow, indifferent rhythm until someone kicked the hornet's nest. The young tech wiped his eyes with a grease-stained sleeve. "We didn't do anything," he whispered. "We just existed here." Vance placed a hand on his shoulder. Her voice was rough but calm. "That's the point. We belong here." They didn't. Silence filled the bunker again. But it was different now. The tension was gone. In its place was a quiet, bone-deep exhaustion and something else. A fragile, trembling gratitude. Not for winning, but for witnessing, for seeing the universe flex its muscles, for realizing how small they were, and yet how deeply rooted. As dawn broke over Geneva, the first official broadcast went out, not from governments, but from ordinary people. A farmer in Kansas filmed his cows grazing under a clear morning sky. A teacher in Mumbai recorded kids laughing in a classroom, sunlight streaming through the windows. A fisherman in Chile held up his net, full of silver fish, the sea sparkling behind him. No words, just proof. We're still here. In the lunar bunker, Vance watched Earth turn slowly in the viewport. The 3 dead dreadnoughts near Saturn would be studied, towed in for examination. But the real lesson wasn't in their broken hulls. It was in the quiet hum of the planet below. The wind in the trees. The tide pulling at the shore. The Cathar had conquered stars by ignoring the dirt beneath their feet. They'd forgotten that even the smallest pebble, given enough time and the right push, could bring down a giant. As the sun rose over Earth, Vance finally picked up her cold coffee. She took a sip, wincing at the bitterness. Then she smiled, a small, tired thing. The universe had fought for them today. She Zetter 2000, with she. Not with lasers or missiles, but with ice and gravity and the slow, unstoppable turn of time. And for the first time in days, she felt the ground beneath her feet. Solid, safe, home. The first real sunrise after the silence felt like a gift nobody deserved. Not in the bunker beneath the moon, where the lights never changed, but down on Earth where people finally saw the sun again, without that weird, heavy chill in the air. In a small town nobody had ever heard of. Someone left their front door open, just to feel the morning breeze. It carried the smell of wet grass and distant rain. ordinary things that suddenly felt sacred. For days, the world had held its breath, not knowing if the next dawn would come. Now, here it was. Quiet, normal, alive. Admiral Vance sat alone in Tranquility Prime, staring at the cold coffee in her mug. The kind of cold that meant it had been sitting there long enough for the steam to vanish. Long enough for the panic to fade into something quieter. Exhaustion. Maybe. Or wonder. Outside the thick viewport, Earth hung in the black, glowing soft and blue like nothing had ever touched it. But Vance knew better. She'd felt the planet's heartbeat stutter, heard the silence when the siphon field snapped, and she'd watched the Cathar Armada, those giants who thought they owned the stars, get torn apart not by human hands, but by the slow, ancient rhythm of the universe itself. Ice, gravity, time. Things older than cities, older than wars. Things the Cathar never even looked at. Down on Earth, nobody was celebrating with parades or fireworks. How could they? They didn't even know what had happened. Governments kept the truth locked away not to hide it, but because the truth was too big, too strange to explain in a news bulletin. Instead, people just lived. A baker kneaded dough again, flour dusting his arms like snow. An old fisherman mended his nets by the harbor, the sea slapping gently against the docks like it always had. Kids kicked a soccer ball in a dusty field, arguing over whose turn it was to score. Life didn't roar back. It just slipped in quietly, like someone turning up the lights after a storm. And in that quiet, something shifted. People looked at the sky differently, not with fear, but with a kind of hushed respect. Like they'd walked past a sleeping bear in the woods and only realized how close they'd come when they were already safe. Back in the bunker, the mood wasn't joy. It was something deeper, heavier. The weapons teams sat slumped at their consoles, staring at empty screens where missiles and lasers had failed. One man ran his hands over the controls that had fired the last nuclear warhead, a weapon built to end cities, and whispered, "We threw our strongest punch," and it was a feather. Another tech, the one with paint-stained fingers, kept replaying the sensor logs of the comet impacts. Not the explosions, but the ripples in the Cathar shields. The tiny, almost invisible moments where ice met arrogance and won. "We didn't save ourselves," he said, his voice rough. "The universe did." It wasn't a boast. It was a fact, as plain as dirt. And it left everyone feeling small. Not in a bad way, but like they'd finally seen the ocean for the first time, and realized how tiny their boat really was. Vance walked to the main viewport. Near Saturn's rings, the 3 surviving dreadnoughts drifted, dark and dead. No lights, no energy, just hollow shells waiting to be studied. But she didn't care about them. She cared about the blue dot below, the one with the crooked clock tower and the bakery that sold cinnamon rolls at 2 a.m., the one where a little girl had finally caught her yellow balloon. Earth hadn't fought. It hadn't needed to. It just was. And in being itself part of the solar system's slow, patient dance, it had become untouchable. The Cathar thought they were harvesting resources. They never saw the landmines hidden in the dirt, the comets falling for millions of years, the gravity tides pulling like invisible strings, the quiet strength of a planet that had survived asteroid strikes and ice ages without blinking. They'd looked at Earth and seen only weakness. They'd missed the behemoth sleeping beneath the surface, not a monster, but the deep, unshakable truth that this place belonged to something older and wiser than conquerors. Later that morning, Vance stood before the UN Security Council. Not in Geneva, but in a makeshift chamber on the moon. Linked by video to leaders on Earth, the room was silent. No flags. No speeches about victory. Just faces tired, lined with worry, but alive. Vance didn't wear her uniform. She wore simple clothes, like she'd stepped out of a crowd. When she spoke, her voice was calm, like she was telling a story over coffee, not making history. "We didn't win because we were strong," she began. The words hung in the air, simple and true. "We won because we were here. Because Earth isn't just a rock. It's part of a system, a family of planets, comets, and gravity that's been running longer than we've existed." The Cathar saw a quiet planet. They saw radios and cities and thought, easy pickings. But they didn't see the machinery beneath it all. The slow, patient forces that shaped mountains and oceans. While we were still learning to walk, they walked into a trap they never knew existed. And the trap wasn't ours. It was the universe's. She paused, looking at the faces on the screens. "Today, we learn a hard truth. We are not masters of the void. We are guests. And the universe doesn't care about our weapons or our pride. It only cares if we remember where we stand." Her voice softened. "So let's not celebrate tonight. Let's remember. Remember the baker kneading dough. Remember the fisherman mending nets. Remember the kids playing soccer in a dusty field. That's what we saved. Not a planet to conquer, but a home to cherish." When she sat down, nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. But in the silence, something settled. A shift. People finally understood. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its bombs or its ships. It was in its connection to this fragile, beautiful world. The one with the wet grass and the morning breeze. The one that had just proven, without firing a single shot, that it could outlast even the mightiest invaders. That night, as Earth turned toward the stars, ordinary moments became sacred. In a village in Kenya, a grandmother lit a candle and told her granddaughter stories under the moon, not about heroes with guns, but about how the wind carries seeds across deserts, how rivers carve canyons drop by drop. In a city in Canada, a street musician played a slow, hopeful tune on his guitar, the notes floating into the warm night air. In a hospital in Brazil, a nurse held a newborn's tiny hand, whispering, "You made it. You're home." No one mentioned the Cathar. No one needed to. The lesson was in the quiet. The universe is vast, but it protects its own. And Earth was finally learning to listen. Back in the bunker, Vance picked up her cold coffee again. Took a sip. It was bitter, stale, but it was hers. Hers to drink. Hers to spill. Hers to leave sitting on the console while she watched Earth glow in the viewport. The 3 dead dreadnoughts would be studied. Yes, their tech would be pored over. But the real treasure wasn't in their broken hulls. It was in the sunrise on a farmer's field, the laugh of a child chasing a balloon, the steady beat of a planet that had just whispered, "I am still here." As the clock ticked toward midnight on Earth, Vance finally smiled. Not a big smile, just the small, tired curve of lips that know they've been given a second chance. She set the mug down, the ceramic clinking softly against the metal console. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. But down below, in the blue cradle of home, life hummed on quiet, resilient, and finally, truly grateful. The behemoth hadn't roared. It hadn't needed to. It had simply been, and that was enough.